always talking about time, aren't we?
Constantly.
What time is it? I'm running out of time. Or, how it just seems to vanish when you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah, it's this backdrop to everything.
Exactly. But have you ever really paused and thought about what time actually is?
It's tricky.
I mean, it's not something you can touch and see.
Right.
And even with all the amazing science we have, defining it, is it a dimension? Or something that just popped into existence 13.8 billion years ago, it still feels, kind of elusive.
That's the fascinating puzzle we're digging into today.
Yeah.
We've looked at some really thought-provoking material that offers a totally different perspective on it all.
Okay.
It asks us to think, maybe time isn't fundamental. Maybe it comes from something else.
Right.
So our mission, really, is to explore these ideas together, see if we can maybe unlock a different way of understanding it.
And this new perspective, it has a name, doesn't it? Motion theory.
That's the one, motion theory.
And right from the start, it makes a pretty bold claim. Kind of surprising.
It really does. Motion theory suggests that time isn't a primary piece of reality.
Okay.
Instead, what we experience as time, well, it might just be a result of something more basic.
Which is?
Motion.
Motion. Okay, let's unpack this. So, motion theory says time isn't a thing or a dimension, but the local resolution speed of motion patterns.
Yeah, that's the phrase. It sounds a bit technical, I know.
A little bit. Could you maybe break that down for us? So instead of a big universal clock ticking away,
right,
you're saying it's more about how fast things change and organize themselves, but locally, in a specific place.
Precisely. At its core, it means our sense of time comes from how motion organizes itself into the patterns we see everywhere.
Okay.
The universe isn't still, right?
Yep.
Everything's moving. Subatomic particles, huge galaxies, everything.
Always moving.
And motion theory says this isn't just random movement. It forms structured loops.
Rhythm loops. You mean everything is basically vibrating or cycling?
Exactly like that. Take an atom, for instance. It's not a solid ball. It's particles whizzing around, right?
Yeah.
And its stability, why it holds together, comes from those particles moving in synchronized loops.
Ah, okay.
The theory argues these motion loops, and crucially, how well they stay in sync, are what's fundamental. It's not just a metaphor.
Right. I can sort of picture that for tiny things, atoms and stuff, but how does that connect to our feeling, that time is passing, moving forward? That feels like a big leap.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. It introduces this idea called sync drift.
Sync drift?
Yeah. Motion theory basically says no motion loop stays perfectly in sync forever.
Nothing's perfect, right?
Exactly. There's this natural tendency for these loops to just gradually drift out of sync with everything around them.
Like losing the beat.
Kind of, yeah. This tiny desynchronization, they call it a phase shift. Think of it like a tiny, tiny lag building up in their rhythm.
Okay.
That subtle drift, the theory proposes, is what we perceive as time passing. And the buildup of this sync drift over longer periods, well, that's what the theory suggests aging is.
So wait, my laptop getting slower isn't just old tech. It could be partly the tiny motion loops inside it falling out of sync.
Well, probably a bit of both. Old tech definitely plays a part.
Okay. Fair enough.
But yeah, the theory suggests this sync drift is a fundamental aspect of why things change and degrade over time. It's a really different lens.
It really is. So if everything has these motion loops, does that mean everything has its own sort of time, its own experience of time passing?
Absolutely. That's a key part of it. Motion theory suggests every structure exists in its own sync frame.
Sync frame.
And that frame is set by how fast its internal motion loops resolve patterns.
Okay, examples.
Think about a bacterium. Its metabolism is incredibly fast.
Yeah, super fast.
So its motion loops resolve very quickly. Now contrast that with a star. Huge, slow nuclear fusion happening.
Right. Takes billions of years.
Its motion loops resolve vastly slower. According to the theory, they simply don't share the same temporal reality. They don't experience the same now.
So a bacterium could live its whole life in what feels like less than a blink to a star.
That's the implication
Yeah.
of light bending.
Truly. Okay, then why do we humans all seem to be on roughly the same page time-wise?
Good question. It's because we exist within a similar sync range.
Our biology.
Our internal biological processes, yeah.
Ah.
The resolution speeds of the motion loops that make us up are similar enough.
Ah.
So we end up sharing what the theory calls a shared illusion of time.
An illusion. Wow.
It's not that time itself is universal and uniform, but our internal clocks, our sync rates, are just ticking at roughly the same speed. See?
Yes, I think I do. That makes sense. So when physicists talk about time dilation for, say, a super fast particle, or we think about the incredibly long lifespan of something like a neutron star, it's not that they're actually bending some universal time.
That's exactly what motion theory argues. They aren't warping a dimension called time.
Okay.
They're just operating within their own local loops, which happen to have vastly different rates of resolving motion, of sync resolution.
Their internal clocks are just built different, fundamentally.
Fundamentally different speeds, yes, because their underlying motions are different.
This is getting really deep. So it's not just individuals having their own time, but there's a whole structure to it, all interconnected.
Yes, exactly. The universe isn't just a random collection of these separate loops.
Right.
It's described as a nested cascade of motion rhythms.
Nested cascade, like Russian dolls.
Kind of like that, yeah. Think of layers building on layers. You've got electrons syncing up to make atoms.
Okay.
Atoms syncing to make molecules. Molecules building cells.
Right, up the chain.
All the way up to planets, solar systems, even the arms of galaxies spinning. Each level is built on the sync motions of the level below it.
So at each bigger step, the meaning of time changes. What matters shifts.
Precisely. A microsecond rhythm that maybe an AI could detect is totally meaningless on the scale of a galaxy's rotation, which takes hundreds of millions of years.
So the relevant time is always local to that scale's motion loops.
It's refined by the resolution speed of the dominant loops at that scale, yes. The quick vibrations inside an atom set its internal time, while the slow swirl of a galaxy sets a completely different, much grander time scale.
Okay. Everything is motion. Loops syncing up, gradually drifting apart. That's time passing or aging. Different scales have different speeds, I think I'm following. But consciousness, where does that fit? It feels like a totally different category of thing.
Right. And this is another really fascinating turn the theory takes.
Okay.
It suggests that consciousness itself might have emerged when a particular motion loop. Our brain got complex enough to actually notice this sync drift happening.
Wait, our brains evolved to detect drift. We're sync drift detectors.
In a manner of speaking, yeah. Think about it from this perspective. What is memory?
Remembering things that happened.
Right. In motion theory terms, memory could be seen as the brain encoding past states of resolved motion, how things were synced.
Okay.
Now, what about prediction? Thinking about the future.
Trying to figure out what comes next.
Which could be the brain extrapolating these sync rhythms forward, projecting how the patterns will likely continue or drift.
And awareness. Just being aware right now.
That moment of awareness. The theory suggests that simply the moment our complex motion loop, our brain, detects a change, either in its own internal synchronization or in the sync patterns of the world around it.
So the very act of noticing change, noticing there was a before and there might be an after, that's where our conscious sense of time comes from.
That's the core argument, yes. The recognition of this drift, this difference between past resolved states and potential future states, is what gives rise to our subjective experience and our very concept of time.
Wow. So time wasn't just there from the beginning. It emerged when things got complicated enough to notice themselves changing.
That's the idea. It emerged with the complexity needed to perceive and process these changing synchronization patterns.
This is so different from how time is usually talked about in physics, isn't it? You mentioned general relativity, quantum mechanics earlier. How does motion theory really stack up against those established ideas?
Well, mainstream physics gives us incredibly powerful ways to measure and predict things related to time. General relativity, for example, treats time as a coordinate woven together with space-time, and describes how gravity affects it.
Right, bending space-time.
Exactly. Quantum mechanics often treats time differently, sometimes more like a parameter than a fundamental observable, depending on the interpretation. And thermodynamics links the arrow of time to entropy of the universe tending towards disorder.
Okay, those are descriptions of how things behave in time, or how time relates to other things. But motion theory is trying to define what time is, fundamentally.
Precisely. It's offering a definition for the nature of time itself, not just its effects or relationships.
So time isn't a dimension to be warped.
In this view, no. It's the local speed at which motion synchronizes.
And aging isn't just wear and tear.
It's the fundamental process of that synchronization drifting, sync drift.
And consciousness isn't just signals in the brain.
It's the awareness of that drift, the recognition of changing patterns. It's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It really is. So let me try and sum this up. If this theory holds, then time, as we feel it and measure it, wasn't there at the Big Bang in some fundamental box.
Not as we experience it now.
First, there was just motion, pure change.
Motion existed before structure, yes.
Then that motion started falling into rhythms, patterns,
Rhythm before stable structure, interactions syncing up.
creating these sync loops before we ever had clocks or anything.
Exactly. Sync loops existed long before anything we'd call a clock.
And time only became a thing when consciousness, complex brains, got sophisticated enough to notice that these loops weren't perfectly stable, that they drift.
That's the essence of it. Time, the concept, emerged when complex motion recognized and started to label this ongoing process of synchronization and drift.
So our calendars, religions, even our physics theories about time.
You could see them all as attempts by us, these complex arrangements of motion loops to make sense of, to map the drifting rhythms that underlie everything.
Wow. Just wow. So the big takeaway here is that time, this thing that feels so fundamental, might actually be a consequence, an emergent property of motion and our awareness of its changing patterns.
That's the core idea we wanted you to grapple with today.
That really makes you think differently. How does that perspective change how we view aging or consciousness itself?
It opens up huge questions, doesn't it?
Definitely. And if time isn't a fundamental dimension but something that emerges from motion, well, what else that feels completely fundamental about our reality might also be an emergent property of something even more basic.
That's the crucial next step, isn't it? To really sit with this idea and see where it leads your thinking. It challenges our assumptions about reality itself.
It certainly gives you a lot to chew on. If time is tied to motion and perceiving drift, what other bedrock concepts might just be patterns we've noticed? It's a truly provocative thought to leave things on.